Uh, I'm very excited to be here for the Indigenous Futures stream. I've been looking forward to this for a while. This is going to be a very interesting conversation between four or technically five Indigenous, Black Indigenous, and people of color creators from around the planet. I am Silver Spook, uh, Native Hawaiian indie adventure game and cyberpunk game creator, also protector of Mauna Kea here on the Big Island of Hawaii. And Yeah, why don't y'all go ahead and introduce yourselves? Starting from
Megan,
Tim.
you want to go first?
Yeah, you first.
Oh, from me? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, I'm Tim. I run a YouTube channel called Conquest of Dread, and I also do various other things under that name. I'm Maori from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I do a lot of stuff mainly around, I guess, kind of like the intersection of politics and culture, that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess that's the basic rundown. But Megan, what about you?
Tanzi, Megan Bernestika-san, Apatuako san Hamilton, Ontario, Nugent. Hi, I'm Megan Byrne. I'm Métis of the Métis Nation of Ontario, or Apatuako san and I'm a video game designer, and I'm in Ontario, and that's where in Canada. Oh yeah, global, right? Santo.
Yeah. So yes, hi, my name is Santo. I originally born and raised in Paraguay with my Guarani family, and now I reside in Toronto, Canada. And I specialize in making video games, generally based on like Guarani stories and teachings. And currently, I'm working on a Indigenous Futurist game about Guarani mechs and cyberpunk. But that's generally what I do. Yeah.
Cool. Right, and we're still waiting on Saber, right?
I think Saber, are you in there?
Here.
Okay, wait. I think I gotta unmute. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
Hey, Saber. Are you there? Okay, I think I unmuted Saber. Are you there, Saber? if Saber comes, hopefully Saber will come through. But just keep in touch. Anyways, I don't really know where to start with this. There's a lot of directions that this can obviously go in. One topic that I was recently on a couple panels, we're talking about Indigenous futures and Indigenous issues generally speaking. But Indigenous futures I thought was kind of like an important topic as well, because we often discuss like decolonization, indigeneity, like what it means, what it has been. But I find like the topic of what the world could look like, in a fully decolonized future, and also like the present where there actually are a lot of indigenous, kind of people don't like often think people think of indigenous and you think of, well, I would say indigenous people don't, but a lot of the Western world thinks of indigeneity as a certain kind of, what do you call it? Like not like a zoo, but kind of like a past version. Like Hawaiians are in grass skirts, in huts, only solely, moving, like, planting their taro and paddling their canoes, and it's a kind of very particular kind of like ancient version of human civilization. But and I bring this up all the time, and I know like many of us have talked about this within our circles, but that indigeneity doesn't necessarily mean something that's in the past. In fact, it should be something that is seen as something that's happening in the present and in the future. So like Hawaiian society, like I live on the Big Island of Hawaii. I make cyberpunk adventure games from a native Hawaiian perspective. I am an indigenous futurist, right? And I think a lot of us would identify with that. And that doesn't, we're not indigenous because we happen to have high-speed internet connections, artificial intelligence training, and all these other things, making video games, making rocket ships. There are indigenous people making space companies right now as we speak, but they're not identified by the broader Western world, I would say, as indigenous. They're just kind of like, oh, they're just they're foreign sometimes, right? So anyway, so I thought that kind of like recontextualizing and thinking in all of our minds for indigenous people, but also for the rest of the world, what actually is an indigenous future and an indigenous present by extension. So I'll just kind of throw that out to whoever wants to take that and roll with it. Like, what do you think an indigenous future is?
Well, I think that's like a good point. I think a lot of the I guess misunderstanding that I see on Twitter from like other leftists when they're talking about things like decolonization is that they seem to think that and this is something that we saw a lot on Twitter over the last couple of days. It was that that dude Joshua Jackson that started a big shitstorm because he was saying that no indigenous nations exist anymore and that we can't go back to the past and all this kind of just this like hilarious stuff, which just showed exactly how out of touch he was. But I know he got rightly dunked on by like a lot of people that were far more eloquent than myself. But this idea that decolonization means moving backwards to a historic kind of lifestyle. Like it means like people thinking that it means that we all want to go out, we want to go back to like living in the bush. And it's I mean like some people might want to do that or whatever. That might be the plan for some people. But I saw a quote by someone else, I can't remember who it was, where they said that decolonization isn't about moving back to the past, but it's about taking control of the future. So it's like, I think through, what a lot of people would consider like these new concepts of like, like permaculture and things like that, which are actually really kind of like these things that have like, like hundreds of thousands of years of tradition behind them. It's like, we can move forward while kind of referencing like our past and traditions and things like that. And it doesn't have to be a strict emulation of the past or anything like that. It's just kind of like, taking influence and guidance from our traditions and ancestors and all those things and creating a better future from that.
Greetings.
Yeah, and
Hey, Saber.
Hey, Saber.
Hey, Saber.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, go ahead. Give a quick intro, Saber. Go ahead.
Yeah. We maybe turn Saber up a little bit. He seems kind of quiet.
Oh,
hang on. Wait, let me.
Yeah. I don't know how to do that, but yeah, you go turn yourself up.
1 second. Okay, I think that's the highest I can go.
Oh, that's good.
Cool. Yeah. We're doing a stream about cyberpunk and my internet's cracking up right now.
That's the most cyberpunk thing I've seen all day.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're being suppressed.
I'm being suppressed. I'm being what's it called, censored right now. I make Afrofuturist content on YouTube, and I think that's about it.
There you go.
Where are you?
Oh, I'm in the UK right now. Just it is quite fascinating still to this day that we are able to have these kinds of conversations due to just how advanced the technology is. I suppose like developing what Tim was saying just now. It's basically the whole idea that like we need to go back to like anarcho-primitivist lifestyles. It's just so I don't know where people get that idea from, to be honest. And
I find that a lot of people that jump on board without knowing really what's up tend to be those kind of people. Like you get these anarcho-primitivists that are just like, hell yeah, decolonize, brother. Yeah, we'll get into that. And then it's like they actually have no idea what anyone is talking, like what we're talking about or anything. It's a completely different thing. But they've just like built up this kind of weird noble savage thing in their head that they're like, yeah, can't wait to go back to that. But yeah, carry on, sir.
Well, the other interesting thing that I've come across recently is that when you do type in things like permaculture and like food forests onto like YouTube and stuff like that, you see all these people that are just like, look at this new thing that I discovered. We need to do this permaculture stuff. And it's like, obviously, indigenous peoples have been doing that for the longest time, and now that we found ourselves in a position where we cannot sustain ourselves with like factory farming and all these kinds of things, now they're trying to now we have to look into the past and use the techniques that have sustained cultures for a long time. Yeah, and obviously using technologies that can help us to do it in a potentially even more developed way, right? Like using like these kinds of things, AI, everything. Right?
Yeah. That's another thing. Like a lot of people think of indigenous cultures as being static, of being like locked in time, and being like, okay, these are the tools that they used, and they only ever used these, and left to their own devices, they never would have developed. Whereas, like, it's very easy to look back at a lot of different cultures around the world, look at, even like pre-contact and post-contact, the way that tools and culture evolved, and it's like, and like a good example of this, I think, is with in New Zealand with our tattooing tamoko, how we went from very like simple kind of hand tools to adopting like all the way up to electric tools that we use these days.
Oh crap! What did I just do?
It's like it's.
Oh no. What did I just do? Oh shoot. Sorry about that, Tim. Sorry, Tim. You just got cut off for a second.
We have to keep maintaining this thing in the past or whatever like that. It was just kind of like, like these are better and safer tools. Well, for the most part or whatever. So we can make these. We can adapt and we can kind of grow and we can kind of add this into what we're doing. So I think it's like another thing is that like we don't have to, like, we can look at the traditions and look at everything like that, but we can also keep an eye on what else is happening in the world. We can like kind of incorporate new inventions and new things if it is a way that is beneficial to us.
You know what's crazy to me about like the whole with like permaculture and forest management is that like in UK they had that. Like they had that knowledge and that technology, and that's what they were doing. And then when the whole like expansion project started, the people they sent over here had no clue and had no knowledge of this stuff, and just they're looking to their government or whatever who's like, oh, it's a farm. That's a thing. And so you lost, like England lost a lot of knowledge when they came over here. And then it's so weird because like I'm really into like medieval studies, like European medieval studies, and like I just think of like how the reaction would have been different if you'd had, the families that would managing the forests of like Wales and England came over here and saw it. You wouldn't have gotten that BS of like, oh, so untouched. They would have looked at that and they'd be like, oh, which one of you is doing this? Because there's no way this forest so plentiful and full of food is natural, because that's not how nature works.
Yeah,
there's
and like
a lot of stuff in. Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, to go off that point too, that like my favorite thing to do to like blow people's minds apart is explaining to them that potatoes are not from Europe. And it always surprises me when people don't know that. I guess like I grew up in South America, like right next to Bolivia, so like that's where potatoes first started, like Bolivia and Peru, like by the Incas. And so I guess like it's more common knowledge there, but like some people just assume that potatoes are from Europe. And the thing is like potatoes didn't make it to Europe until like the 1600s or so. And before then, like potatoes were farmed, and like not just farmed, but like almost like there are so many different types of potato that were made, and it was like there's like agricultural diversity in South America. And same thing with corn. Like corn is not something that you can find natively throughout all of South America. Like it originated around Mexico, but it was not a seed that was actually like found naturally in South America. And that was because people would trade with each other. So they would trade seeds, and they would trade different types of crops. And that's how throughout South America you see like similar crops throughout the continent, even though like that's not necessarily where they originated. And that's because people would trade seeds with each other. They would share knowledge about how to plant certain crops. So it's not that indigenous people are, just apart from each other. They were all still living in the same region, and they would share things with each other. But obviously, because of the way that when settlers come over and they look at things, they don't understand them, so they make a lot of assumptions and they say, oh, this is what happened or how it happened, and then that kind of becomes the common knowledge about that, and then it just gets like really misunderstood. And the funny thing is that like potatoes are like um, they get like inserted in a lot of like medieval stuff, right? And it's like if you have potatoes in any kind of setting, that means you acknowledge that like if they were brought over from South America.
That was like the whole deal with was it The Witcher 3 when it came out and it didn't have any people of color in it, and you know, all these people got really upset and they were like, well, you know, if they added that, it would be unrealistic because, you know, like there were only white people in this area then, you know, and then it's like every table you go to in that game that's like covered in potatoes.
Yeah,
Shit like that. It's like it would be more like knowing what we know of the area that game is based on. It's like it would be more likely that you would see a person of color than you would see a potato.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did someone say? The Americas is the land of the cultivated nightshade, and Europe's the land of the cultivated rose. So it's like, so you can tell like anything that's in the nightshade family, that all comes from here. Like all comes from like the Americas. And I think it's really weird, especially like people go on about like, oh, you can't use this. I'm like, okay, fine. Then like Italy, they no longer get tomatoes and they no longer get corn. If you're gonna like play that game, then half of anything Italy makes, they're not allowed to have anymore. Like I hate that game.
Yeah. There's like plenty. Another thing about the potatoes and stuff. There's like plenty of like evidence for all the journeys from you know, all throughout the Pacific and over to South America and stuff. There's the sweet potato that we have, kumara, is from over there. And it's like we have all these like stories of all these like journeys and trading back and forth and all this kind of stuff like that. And then, you know, like when Europeans arrived and they were like, wow, how did this get here? And, you know, we're like, okay, this is how it got here and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, wow, it's so crazy. Like, there's no way this could have got here, you know? And like it kind of goes even up into recent history with the what's his name with the Kontiki thing, where he had this, you know, like they had this they invented this theory about how you know, like people got from like South America to the Pacific and back and stuff, and it was like this just a ridiculous theory that relied on like just all this, like there was like you know, some kind of like tropical storm and like all this bullshit or whatever like that. It's like they couldn't just accept that it's like, oh no, like there were people that just built boats and they sailed those boats over there and back, the same people that charted the entire Pacific by the stars, you know, like it's fine, it's no big deal. But there's like this whole idea where it's like, okay, if European people couldn't make voyages of that length, then definitely none of these natives could have done it.
Yeah, I mean, like I think like that whole concept of like if the Western Europeans and the Westerners generally, we couldn't do it, absolutely nobody could have done it. It had to be aliens that built the Moai, the pyramids, sailed across the Pacific. You know, until we need to make, you know, until Disney needs to make another $1 trillion from I don't know, Pacific cultures with Moana. Then they can do it. Okay. All right. No, but like, you know, I was just like, you know, and there's like, because I've been kind of like discussing, like, I wanted to get, like, I should have, next time I'll try to get some people from even Asia on a future panel. But, you know, there's a lot of things now. I don't want to go this it's too of a specifically hot topic and then get this entire stream banned. But I will say that, like, there's a lot of there are indigenous cultures in Asia as well. Like, we're in the Pacific, and if you go back deep enough,
Russia.
The Lapita peoples are Southeast Chinese, which is like one of the major migrations from which, you know, the Hawaiians and the Fijians, Tahitians, and of course, like, you know, or Tim and I are both from the Pacific. But and there's a lot of like, well, anything that happens that doesn't come from the West, like, it's stolen technology. Like, particularly now from Asia, it's like everything that you couldn't possibly have invented, that you must have stolen. This TikTok, you just stole everything from us. The 5G, you just stole it all. Like, even the Hawaiians, were more advanced. Like, I bring this up often. Like, in 1800s, by the Europeans' own admission in a Paris convention, the Hawaiians were demonstrating, they said excellence in education was universal in Hawaii. They were higher literacy rate than Britain, than the United States, than Germany, France, you name it, by the Europeans on admission. They said, how is it possible that they could have such an educated population, inventing, submarines when Jules Verne was just dreaming of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and it scared the crap out of them. And Hawaii, which is why there was a coup, as there always is, because it's impossible for a non-European people or an indigenous people or a non-Western people to possibly advance. And Hawaii had to be annihilated, and our literacy rate plunged into the doldrums, and all of us ghettoized, because it was an example of what was possible when non-Western European peoples and imperial powers are able to actually just do their thing. And anyway, I wanted to pull kind of Saber into this. I don't know, Saber, how is it in the UK, as just in general, what do you think about all that?
Yeah. So one thing that this is kind of illustrating is how just bankrupt the Western education system is in general, especially regarding history, because like the way we are taught history, and this is something that I've spoken about in a few of my videos as well. It's just so disjointed. There's no real chronology unless it's something that's relevant to like making Britain look good or making the West look good, for example. And like this is, I'll give you all one example just to kind of illustrate this. And this is again something I'll reference in my next video. Is that like when we talk about World War II, for example, the main things that come across is what the Nazis did to the Jews and all this kind of stuff, which is absolutely horrible. And we can all acknowledge that was a terrible thing that happened to the Jewish people, right? But then if you Google the British in Kenya, you'll find out that a few years after World War II ended, the British had put like over 1 million Kenyans in concentration camps. So it's like, if that was the main reason for it, which is obviously a terrible thing, what happened to the Jews, how can that be the sole reason if a couple of years after that the British were locking up 1 million Africans in concentration camps? It's so disjointed. It's so and it's one of the things where they have to kind of sanitize it after the fact to try to make it seem like the British Empire was all good. What the US was doing was all good. It's just they were trying to civilize the world by doing what they did. It was all for the purpose of civilizing everyone, like educating people. And obviously that's just total nonsense when you actually like look into the history and you can see how advanced people were even before any kind of interaction with Europe. And like the examples that you've given are like perfect examples. And there's also like many examples in African cultures where they've had like technologies that are like way more advanced than what the Europeans had when they came over. So for instance, let's say there was a handful of like European countries that came over like just before the slave trade started, I think. I think one of which was Portugal. So they went to around like West Africa, and they discovered that like the clothing that they had over there in Africa was like of a much higher quality than what the Europeans had. And so they wanted to trade with them to get that clothing. And this is all like recorded down, written down, things like that. And there's also a particular culture called the Dogon people. And one thing that the scientists still can't really figure out how is that like these people, they somehow had knowledge of stars that modern day science didn't like discover until like the 20th century with like telescopes and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, how the hell did these people with in quotes, no technology have knowledge of this star that no one has seen until like Western scientists discovered developed their technology, their telescopes to a certain level. And it's only until we sort of go out of our own way to discover like indigenous histories, African histories, Asian histories, and all these kinds of things that we can kind of finally like put together a chronology that actually makes sense. Like it's not this far out thing that like age or like these cultures had technology. It's not like this ridiculous thing like how the hell did they build these things? It's not that out there. These are people, like people the same way that we are people, right? They develop, they tinker around, they try to improve their agriculture, try to improve their science to continually to sustain their people more, and then they come across, they develop things and they trade with other people, these kinds of things. It's not this ridiculous thing that you have to attribute it to aliens or anything like that, right?
Yeah. What I think is so interesting about that, when you're saying like, oh, they had these stars, they knew of these stars, is one of the things I noticed with Europe is there's a disconnect between the people who experience the things like seafarers, who would have had knowledge of stars beyond the scientists, but the scientists don't talk to them. And I would just think of like the stuff that my dad learned and taught me, and that the stuff that I know from my other friends, their communities, where it's like you look to the side of your eyes and your peripherals. That's how you see stars best, is your peripherals. And a lot of the early telescopes, all they did was just make it closer, so you didn't have to use your peripherals, but you could have seen the same thing through your peripherals. And so what it sounds like to me is like, no, they didn't have glass and all this, but they just trained themselves to see really, really clearly the sky and record it. And I like, that's the other thing too, is I think we disconnect technique when we talk about, like, we always think technology as stuff, and we really disconnect from how important technique is in advancing science and advancing knowledge. Is like, sometimes you work with what you got and you get really good at working with what you got, and then all of a sudden somebody who shows up with like, well, it took us a telescope to see what you saw, and you're like, well, we just figured out how to use our eyes better because we had to.
There's like another similar thing. It reminds me of when I'm gonna say a dirty word here, but when old Captain Cook was moving through the Pacific, and he picked up a navigator who his name was Tapaya, Tapaya was the one who really kind of mapped out the Pacific, and he wrote all, like, he knew where all the islands were, and they were like, wow, this is amazing, can you write it down or whatever? And he drew out this gigantic map of the Pacific, because in his mind he was going on this giant kind of almost like humanitarian mission to unite the islands again, because there'd been this period where a lot of islands had kind of like, kind of lost touch with each other. So he drew out this giant map that that he used to show them, we go from this island to this one, blah 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 blah. But he was the only one that could read it, and when he died, no one could figure it out, and they just assumed it was just complete gibberish or whatever, and that he was actually just navigating from memory or something like that. But and it's like this thing for years where it's like people have always said like, no, it's like, it's just a different way of looking at the map. You're, instead of like a single flat image showing us exactly how far apart the islands are, you're looking at one island where the sun is, and like kind of from where you're standing in relation to the next is where you go, and all this stuff, and all these like like Western cartographers for years and years were just like, no, that's bullshit, that doesn't work or whatever. And then just in the last year or so, they were like, oh, actually we figured out what it means, and it's like just ridiculously accurate. Like, this can chart, like, if you're standing on one island, you just wait until the sun is at this point in the middle of the day, and then you can find your way to any one of these islands just from this map. It's like this thing where it's like the knowledge is there, but it's just it's been lost for a while. Like, like, this is the thing, like, we don't necessarily have access to all the knowledge that they had just because of suppression. Like, down here we had the Tohunga Suppression Act, which was like, like elite, they kind of criminalized a lot of cultural practices and stuff. So it's like, if someone had asked me personally how that map worked, I would have been like, I don't fucking know, but like, as a culture, we knew at some point, we knew what that did, and we knew how to read it and stuff. So it's, I think that's also a part of, like, through decolonization, there is also this kind of move to rediscover these things that were lost. So it's kind of like, even though we're not trying to move backwards or anything like that, it's like, there's even the stuff that we've lost, there's things we can regain from that.
Yeah, and I think there's also like a lot of valuable things to, like, also like looking at other parts of the world, like for example in South America. One book that I've been recommending a lot to people to find out like about indigenous politics in South America is Jose Maria Tegui, who was a Peruvian philosopher who wrote a book called In the Red Corner, which is
yeah, I've heard
basically
of this.
him adapting like Marxist ideas to like indigenous thought, especially like in relation to Peru, because he basically explains in the book that Peru is, and this was back in like I think around the 1920s or 30s. And he basically just explains Peru is a feudal society where the indigenous people are the peasants, and they, you know, do all the do all the farming for like their, for like the, you know, white state. And he basically, and I want to read this book as well because I've only like read some passages from it and I haven't really dug into it too intimately. But he basically goes on to say that like it's not so much about going backwards to the past to live how the Incas lived, but it's about acknowledging that the society that the Incas lived in was much more advanced than the feudal society of Peru at that time. So in his eyes, and the way he explains this is that by going, that colonized society is actually going backwards. And they were already in the future, but that colonization and that feudal society put them backwards, and they have to find a path to be in the future again, the future that they were in before. So it's like, it's a very interesting kind of like just a juxtaposition of like what time means, and that just because something happened before colonization doesn't mean that that wasn't, you know, less advanced than what the colonized outcome was. And especially in South America, like people sometimes laugh when I explain this to them because like I use the word peasant. But the thing is like indigenous people in South America are literally peasants because they most of them live on farmland that is not actually theirs. They don't own any of the land, but they work on farms and they plant crops and do all those things in order to sell those to a private company or to sell them to another kind of institution where they get like basically nothing in exchange for it. So they barely get any money back from any of those crops. And that was the system that was installed by like the Spaniards and also like the Portuguese and basically any European settler that came to South America, and where they would basically what their thought was like, they saw that they could grow anything, but they were basically like, we don't want to really do the work. We'll just use the indigenous people that are already here in order to keep farming and keep building these crops, and that way we can, you know, take them, and also basically we keep all the profit. And essentially indigenous people were enslaved into a life of peasantry. And even now, like my mom's family, they were all peasants. My grandpa's family, they were all peasants, and it's kind of like a system where uh, as long as they live on that farm, then they have to keep farming for whoever their, you know, in this case, bosses or whoever the private companies that actually owns the land. And even in Paraguay, Paraguay is still also very much like a feudal society because 99% of the land is owned by private companies or by families who stole the land at some point. And then all that land is mostly like peasants and indigenous people that live on there that like they have to like, it's like this, you know, it's still very much this kind of peasant system where like they have to keep farming to survive, but they don't actually get to own any of that labor and they don't get to own anything of what they actually grow. So it's very much like, so, and basically in South America, when you look at it globally, then so much of that food is not actually like kept in the continent. It's shipped out of the continent, or usually it's used for something else. Like we have a lot of jokes in Paraguay that like Paraguay is like a place where a lot of soy companies go to. So a lot of people grow, private companies will grow soy, which is a real issue because soy means that you have to basically tear down a lot of trees to grow. And then that causes more flooding because the trees are there to stop the flooding. But if you take the trees away, then it causes more flooding. And then it also causes a lot of droughts because of that. So it all is kind of tied in together to this kind of feudal system. And but pulling it back, that's kind of like what the red corner like really gets into, and something that I think if you want to find out about like indigenous Marxism and also just indigenous thought and tying it to like decolonization, and also tying it to like how colonization, capitalism, all those things like put societies backward, then that's a really great book to get into. And also just generally like any of the kind of like peasant groups in South America, they also like, these are all, a lot of them, this is what they all like think about a lot. So they have kind of like not perfected, but like really honed in on like what their issues are and how they could overcome them.
Yeah, I think it's like that's another thing, right? Like, so like people like this guy Joshua that there was the big thing about the other day, saying that like basically everyone, like it's like this kind of idea that everyone in the working class has the same like needs or wants, but then from the way you've described it, and from the way that I've experienced it, and from the way that I'm sure everyone else on this call has, there is a difference in the material conditions and the relation to production for many indigenous people. Like, like how you were saying, like about like the way that the peasants, as you say, work the land and all this kind of thing. Like, a lot of people think that those dynamics don't exist anymore, when it's like, maybe it just doesn't for like, the kind of, I guess, like the white American kind of working class. Well, I mean, like for some it definitely does, but like when you actually want to, like, when you're looking at all these different groups, you've got to realize that if you are kind of working towards some kind of idea of like some kind of like leftist revolution or anything like that, different groups are going to have different material circumstances and different needs to be met to kind of like like I don't know, satisfy their revolutionary potential or join the movement or anything like that. So I don't really get when you get guys like this Joshua Jackson. It's like, we have to like ignore the needs of vast groups of people in favor of, like, I don't know, whatever it's trying to say, whatever. But and it's like, it's you can't treat every like indigenous group or every like colonized people as the same. Like, everyone has, I mean, that's like historic materialism, right? It's like everyone has different parts, like things that will change. It's and I think it's like wild when people that consider themselves Marxist kind of like show their asses on this, because it kind of shows, it's like, man, it's like, okay, so historic materialism ends at the point when like you're not at the bottom of the food chain anymore, when you find out there's like other groups that are like possibly like have a worse side than you, then okay, shit. But I don't know, that's a little bit of a
like
mini
it's definitely
rant, but
when arguments like this come up, it's usually made by people who just aren't equipped to handle those arguments, and like it's just like above their caliber to discuss. And like, and I even like, I acknowledge that there are some issues that like I'm not super knowledgeable on, because I either never grew up in that region, or I just haven't really researched it. And so when those kind of questions come up, I will usually defer to the opinion to the people that actually directly affects, right? So I can't just say that I know this. It's like, okay, well, actually, you know what? I am not the expert on this. So my opinion, my desire to weigh in on this is not really that strong, because what matters most is the opinion of the people that this directly impacts, and what they have, worked to develop. Because, for example, in a place like Bolivia, like something that is very interesting is that how like the success of the Socialist Party there didn't just come about, randomly, but it was because people of the party said like, okay, well, we've been focusing a lot on the miners in the city as like our working people. But the reality is that there are working people outside of the city who are, part of, coca plant unions, and who are farmers, who are these peasants that I mentioned. So they're kind of like, realization is that we can't continue to focus on just the miners. We have to actually go outside of that periphery and focus on the peasants, and focus on the people that, we've ignored until now because we didn't consider them a part of the working class. But they had to, expand their worldview and really like examine like, okay, like we have to make sure that we are including everyone possible in this, so that we actually have a movement. Otherwise, like, that's why they kept, they didn't really amass a lot of followers up until then, because then they realized like, oh, okay, actually we have to go into this particular community and approach them in a way that like we are not forcing them to adapt to our ideology, but we are adapting our ideology to them. And that's like really the important thing about that, and also what kind of Maria Tegui goes over, that like it's not about like grabbing these leftist ideologies and then forcing indigenous people to adapt to it, but rather like indigenous people looking to these ideologies and saying like, okay, like what can we take from that will benefit us, and how can we like adapt that so we're not, we're not losing out on anything.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I mean, also it's part of that whole thing of like meeting people where they're at, like, like you want to be talking to people in a way that they can relate to and in a way that makes sense in their worldview, which I think it's funny that it's like the only time you see on, for a lot of people, the only time you see people talking about meeting people where they're at is when they're talking about like white bigots, and they're like, oh, we gotta meet these people where they're at, It's like, no, fuck those people. Like, I would rather be engaging with the people that are alienated by those people, and if those people see all the work being done, and then they realize that they're fucking idiots, and they can they can figure it out themselves, but I'm not going to waste too much time on them.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to bring up too that this was brought up on a stream I did with Non-Compete recently, and it should be brought up again and again. Anarchism, Kropotkin, Marx, although I mean, no shade to all the long white bearded folks that did a lot of important work to translate thousands of years of indigenous knowledge into something that is palatable to stormtroopers. I'm sorry, Imperial Europeans. But anyways, Marx and Kropotkin borrowed their ideologies from the indigenous peoples. This is you can. I'm very sorry if you're discovering that now, but it has to be acknowledged that the native Hawaiians, like and as even Asante was saying, the indigenous peoples had more advanced, not just agricultural, medicinal, and other technologies, wayfinding, astronomy. They also had more advanced sociological, political technologies, right? Of anarchistic. In Hawaii, I say I am a Pono, Kuleana, and Aloha Aina. I live by those values. I don't live by socialist anarcho-social. I call it partially automated indigenous anarcho-socialism. Is me roughly translating into the broken imperial language that is English what Hawaiians actually practice, right? But this is a deep, and the Vietnamese, the Chinese, the Africans, other Asian peoples, other Turtle Island peoples have had these for thousands of years, and then they were roughly translated into the kind of nightmarish succession of imperial powers that came out of Rome, Britain, Spain, Catholic, Protestant. And I also find it interesting. I just wanted to jump back to this real quick. Obviously, I don't want to spend this whole time shilling for Neofeud, but Neofeud, the game that I created, right? There's a picture of this Neofeud 2 in the bottom left, which has a little bit more of an actual positive indigenous future. Talking about feudalism and how it's really, there is still feudalism. Part of the point of Neofeud is, I think to a lot of indigenous peoples, you get this instantly, that feudalism, capitalism, this imperialism, these are all kind of fundamentally similar methods of the imperial relationships, which I kind of was trying to discuss this as like, indigeneity doesn't necessarily mean like, again, being in a grass skirt, being in a archaic way of being. Indigeneity means that which relates to other people, other cultures, and the earth, or for us it's Wakea and Papa is Earth Mother, Gaia, whatever you call it, relating to each other and people on the earth in mutual respect and in what the West would call egalitarian ways. That's the indigenous people, right? And often they sustain for thousands of years in the places that they're in, trading peacefully with other cultures, different cultures, right? Whether that's Anishinaabe and Sioux, Hawaiian and Tahitian, the 56 ethnic regions of China, the Vietnamese, different ethnic regions, right? And they don't always perfectly coexist in mutual respect. Sometimes there are squabbles, but the dominant, overarching, for thousands of years, you have thousands of years of peace, as opposed to Europe, which is like eternal warfare with half a split second of peace and then 364 days and 23 hours of war. And so imperial culture as the opposition of indigenous, right, is that which does not accept difference, right? That which converts, right, into, you're all going to be Roman now, you're going to use the denarius. If you don't, we're going to put you up we're going to lynch you on a big artisanal tree. The Americans just hang you from a tree. The Romans will put you on artisanal, crucifix. But we do not accept anything but English. You will speak it. If not, well, we'll beat it out of you, right? That's imperial versus indigenous. That's like another way to kind of think of it. And that the feudal society, I know I'm kind of going off on a long tangent, but the feudal society, I think has something to do with the Catholics coming first to South America, the Protestants, who were a bifurcation of an imperial way, one into feudal oppression via blood dynasty, right, and the Catholicism, and then oppression via shadow thrones of dollars. It's called capitalism. And then you have the Protestant. Oh, we don't do feudalism anymore. We just have a bunch of black people chained up on stolen indigenous land. But that's not that different from the feudal society. And the neo-feud is about going like, wait, what is the difference between how you have the billionaire Jeff Bezos who's sitting on a throne of, I'm sorry, we can't talk about him right now. We have the billionaire Bill Gates, because we're on his platform. Billionaire Bill Gates sitting on a throne of billions of dollars. How is that so different from King George, actually? Right? How is that so different from the feudal Spanish conquistadors, actually? It's not that different, is it? Anyway, I'll stop ranting.
I think this also ties in really well with, just tying in a few different threads here. It does really go to show that, like, well, I'll give you just a little side tangent, right? Like, if you look at the situation of like African people, for example, and this is something that like Thomas Sankara said in the 20th century, and he's basically addressing the public, and he's saying, look, we can produce all the things that we need, like right here, but it's basically being appropriated by those who colonize us or those who were our former colonizers, but still hold control over us because of like loans or like these predatory loans that still require so much surplus to be extracted via like various means. And like the form of it has changed to some degree. Like you can't even, well, despite the fact that there is still like slavery going on some places, like in Libya, for example, you can't necessarily be as overt as it was back then, like before quote unquote slavery was abolished in the 19th century. But it was more or less just transformed. Like, let's say you go from like slavery to colonialism, or colonialism, it more or less wasn't necessarily that different in terms of the experience of the people that were having to get like the vast majority of the things that they produced expropriated and exported outwards. And then they only had basically subsistence wages. Like they were still subject to the similar kind of violence. You had people like King Leopold who were still like chopping off the hands and feet of the Africans who didn't necessarily want to be on board with the whole system, right? And most of the Western world basically looked away for a long time. And of course, like the situation that I spoke about with Kenya, right? It's the names are different, but in practice, it's more or less the same. And you can kind of see that even from that phase, so like colonialism till now, right? And how and this again ties into like the whole technological argument as well. And that's all of the rare earth minerals that are mined from Africa to power the globalized like digital age, and how you still have children that are mining the resources to make that happen. And it's this complete disconnect. No one wants to think about the fact that basically the devices that basically everyone watching this or participating in this stream is using devices that contain minerals that were mined by kids probably, or people that basically have no rights whatsoever.
Before you can, I just want to jump in. Thanks a lot, Trekkie69, for the raid. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Trekkie. Yes. Oh no, Trekkie's awesome. Trekkie's awesome.
Cool.
But yeah, no, it's like, and if those resources were to be utilized by those people, whether it's in Africa or in the so-called New World, I always have to preface that by saying so-called, because it's like, oh yeah, look at this new island, as if no one was there. Yeah, like you can imagine how advanced we would be if we actually use the resources as opposed to exporting it for like dirt cheap and then importing things for like a much higher price. And it's like, yeah, it's so clear that if those resources were utilized by the people who are actually mining that, then they can basically be way more developed, right? Like, because if you look at economic underdevelopment in general, like if those surpluses cannot be utilized by the people that are mining those resources or growing those foods, then they don't have the surplus to reinvest in their own civilization the way that they did before, like they were colonized. And so like that surplus was essentially used throughout the entire world, basically, to develop what has come to be known as the West, as the Western world. It's because all that surplus was reinvested, whether it's directly or indirectly, to build or to invest in like trains or to invest in like other kinds of machines, into like factories, and whilst those who were still colonized had to just continue doing like the most basic like agricultural stuff, and not have any time to either perpetuate their culture or to like develop something else as well.
And then like ties into like all those like all the kind of social democracy countries that everyone puts on a pedestal and goes like, oh, like why can't we be more like, like these like European or Norwegian countries and stuff? And it's like, well, because like all of that money that they are using to prop up their kind of like, social kind of social welfare programs and all that thing, like that's all from their history of imperialism and subjugation and things like that. And it's like, yeah, which is why it's kind of like, like it needs to be like this kind of like global thing where everyone can kind of like, yeah, I mean, I guess starting from the ground up, where these like smaller nations can shake off the chains of the larger ones. And
yeah, like one thing that I like to also mention, that there are some events from the global south, like historically, that sometimes people like don't reference to, or like don't think about, even though like they're really important in changing history in terms of being anti-imperialist and trying to imagine a better world. And one of those is like the most important revolution like in recent history is probably the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people talk about it. And that one like it's like an incredible event in history that changed the course of that country forever, and people don't really talk about it. And similarly, there's other events that happened, let's say in South America, the Caribbean, other parts of the global south, where they were major like events that like just completely changed the material reality of that particular region. But it's not really talked about because like sometimes people are just not comfortable with the idea of like a place liberating itself using violent means, or what is perceived as violent, or it's just obscured in the past, and like in favor of other revolutions, like the French Revolution famously, like everyone has pretty much heard about that one, which is funny because the Haitians were revolting to get rid of the French, and that kind of like dichotomy of like, oh well, let's look at this European Revolution but not the Haitian Revolution, because without the Haitian Revolution, a lot of South America wouldn't have been free from like the Spaniards or other colonizers, because Haiti lent their like armies and their forces to other revolutionaries in South America in order to kick the Spanish out. And that's the one thing that people forget, is that like Simon Bolivar is like the liberator of like Venezuela, Colombia, a lot of countries like that were part of like the great Colombian country. But the reason he liberated all those countries is because Haiti lent him armies, and on the condition that if he were to liberate all these countries, that he would end slavery, which he did right after, because that was a promise that Haiti, like basically they had to make in order to receive help from them. And like that's the kind of thing that like I just find incredible that not a lot of people know about, because it's such like an amazing like historical event that is like kind of unparalleled with anything else that has happened in the last couple of centuries. And at the same time, it's like there's a lot of little countries in South America that like it's incredible that they're still around. Like obviously the most popular example is Cuba. Like Cuba by all means should not even exist right now because of everything that has happened to them. But in despite of that, like they are still around and there's still people living on the island. And that's because of just the systems that they've developed to resist like imperialism, to resist any kind of overthrow that would mean like life ending on that island. And I think that is very important to, pulling back to, the context and the needs of each people and of each country to like realize how that relates to their own unique history and how they've been able to do it until now.
Yeah. I just dropped a link in the chat to a Wikipedia about it article about a book, The Black Jacobins, which I haven't read it for a while now. I think I read it when I was like maybe just coming out of high school, but it's a really good book from I think the 30s or the 40s about the Haitian Revolution, and I don't know if I could actually send links.
It's by CLR James. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a video essay at some point about that because like it doesn't seem like many people have really done it justice or barely even spoken about it as well, and that really send like cascades down, not only directly by like them sending support to other oppressed people, but indirectly as well, because obviously it really shook the foundations of the French as well, which weakens their grip to some extent.
Yeah. It's and it's really good book in terms of like if you're interested in Marxism and stuff, which is kind of the lens through which this book is kind of like it spells things out through this very like historical materialist kind of thing, like talks about the events leading up to it and the class politics, issues of class and race. Like there is like this really kind of like it's this amazing story that's told really well, but it is also like it is unashamedly, well, I mean, I think it's like some people say that it is like a bit, it's like too radical for a historical text, but then a lot of people that are really familiar with it were like, no, this is just how it was, like people would like he, I think James was like accused of kind of playing up like a lot of the kind of anti-imperialist kind of sentiment and stuff like that. It's like, no, that's I mean, it's like if you're familiar with what actually happened or anything, it's like like how could you feel any other way? But but it's really good. But also just like the story, the idea of I'm so bad at pronouncing stuff, but Toussaint Louverture.
Oh yeah.
Who was like born a slave and then just kind of like rose all the way up to kind of like lead this revolution. Will be one of the leaders of this revolution. So I'm really surprised that a lot of people haven't spoken more about that, or so definitely looking forward to your video.
Into the whole narrative of like how the West is trying to portray their history as opposed to what actually happened and why it happened. And so if they have to, if they are to admit just the atrocities that had been taking place, and like there's certain things that they have to basically talk about, like the slave trade or like colonialism. They have to talk about it, but it's for one done in a very superficial way, and number two, never really talks about the other added like context as well. And obviously, we don't necessarily learn about how to think in a dialectical materialist way in school. At least I didn't.
Well, not in maybe in Vietnam.
Maybe China. I don't know.
That's what I was talking about. People are like, what does an indigenous future look like? Does that mean we're all just like going back to living in our little huts? I was like, no, like this is one thing, like because here at the Silver Spook worker-owned cooperative and worker commune, where we have no landlords, no bosses, or any capitalism, because that's just living like a native Hawaiian. That's how we lived, actually. We are also like raising kids. We were homeschooling Holly and I, two future future native Hawaiian Kuleana Pono Aloha Aina, which roughly translates into indigenous anarcho-socialists. And I was like, it's not that different. We wake up, we work 3 hours a day because police have done 0 evictions in 5 years because we don't enforce capital and white supremacy here. It's a weird thing to think about, right? Imagine people never being evicted anywhere in your town, I mean, unless they're like burning things down, right? But nobody's been evicted. We live for free for 3 years here. Well, don't tell all the Europeans right now. But but you know, we wake up, right? We work for a few hours, and then I with the kids we go out in the lobby. This is what Indigenous Future. I get out, I check my email. I you know, ghostwrite for William Gibson and make sci. I'm just kidding. I don't ghostwrite him, but I do interact. I make science fiction stories. I program artificial intelligence. I plant some kalo. We come out and then we raise our children for like I work with our children, teach them Native Hawaiian, which they never learned, which I never learned till I was 27, 28. I still don't know enough, right? So we teach them Hawaiian. You know what they don't do? They don't learn that Thomas Jefferson was the greatest person that ever lived and liberated the world. You know, we don't teach the perpetual disinformation that 330 million Americans will suffer in public or private school. They learn. I just taught my daughter. It's like, a lot. The reason why a lot of people's houses around here, they call it Hawaiian Paradise Park. It's because some people wanted to sell fraudulent houses to people on the mainland getting a piece of Hawaii. And that's unfortunately how a lot of the United States and its capitalist system works. She learned that at age 7. So imagine how much more revolutionary would the United States and Canada, everywhere else be if everyone learned the true history of Earth and also actual economics. Not waiting till you're 36 watching a Jim Sterling video, going on a Twitch stream. Oh my God, I've been suffering under capitalism for so long. Let me join the Marxist Trotskyite newspaper selling party. You know, like what if everybody knew what the Vietnamese knew at age 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, right? And the Cubans know at age 6 and 7. How, you know? So that's an indigenous future. To me, like the only path forward really for the capitalist and the imperialist world is an indigenous future, because there will never be history books in the United States by its school system that talk about, oh, let's put some real history. There cannot be, because the United States is fundamentally based on imperialism, slavery, and ongoing slavery, and ongoing capitalism, and it cannot ever, you know. This is a little bit of a radical point, possibly, but how can it? Who would want to support it? People learn what police actually do in the United States, and you see what that resulted in. Black Lives Matter. That's just with a little taste of a little bit of truth, and people are like, what is this system, right? Anyway, so anyway, so I wanted to throw it into the indigenous future. Well, go ahead, Tim, if you want to say something. Yeah.
I was just gonna say something that that is like just related to what you were saying. I saw someone saying the other day about they were talking about like you know, like if there was ever any kind of like socialist or communist kind of like mass revolution or something like that, that people would need to be like a re-education process sort of thing. And I saw a lot of people like jumping in there being like, what, you want to put all the white people in the camps and you want to, you know, like this kind of thing, which I think is like kind of bizarre. Like I can't remember exactly what the wording of the tweet was, so I don't know if it was like, you know, like kind of good or bad or whatever, but like I think there's this tendency for people to assume like this kind of carceral framework for re-education, whereas like what you were talking about, you know, like in America where they, you know, teach them like Thomas Jefferson was like basically superhuman, like, you know, he was like, you know, like these American founding fathers were like, you know, like the apostles too, and then you know, just like
stole
stuff like
everything.
that, like this weird kind of like, you know, like the state ideology that is built up, and it's like that is like, you know, like like that kind of stuff is like, it's like severe indoctrination, you know, and like you get that in any country. Like there's always going to be like some kind of amount of like state ideology sort of thing pushed on the kids through school and stuff. But it's wild that it's like, I think a lot of people, when confronted with the idea that it's like, okay, maybe we would need to look at how people are educated and we need to do all this kind of thing, like they initially think that it's like, oh, it's going to be like, you know, like some kind of like re-education camp. Like I guess, like, I mean, it comes from, you know, like Mao using the term re-education, like that was one of his things and stuff, so people kind of like immediately kind of think, you know, it conjures up these images, but it's like, man, nah, it could just be like, you know, like we take a look at public education and we go like, hey, look, you know, like maybe like, you know, maybe the kids don't need to do the Pledge of Allegiance every day, and, you know, like
bring back home economics. We actually teach them how like commerce works properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like different ideas about yeah, like the commodification of land and all these kind of things like that. Like it's it's so simple, but all these people like just jump to these like really extreme conclusions. It's like the same thing when you say like, oh, we want like land back, we want to decommodify the land, and they're like, well, so where are all the white people supposed to go? And it's like, dude,
We're all gonna
like
be
They
enslaved.
literally can't
just
picture
listen.
you doing anything different than what they did. They
Yeah,
literally
yeah.
can't picture a future where Indigenous people don't kick them
We're
off
like,
their
oh
land
no,
and
they're
make
gonna
them
do
live
what
in
we did to
shitty
them.
places. And then we're like, no, we'll just be your landlords again like we were supposed to. Like, that's the thing I like about the pay the rent in Australia,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, you're bad tenants. You're all bad tenants. None of you have paid your rent. Like, that was the deal in, I
yeah,
know
yeah,
at least in Canada, was the agreement was supposed to be between the Crown and the different Indigenous nations was, you are living here under our roof, so you pay us rent and you be good tenants. And then they're just like, they got all their friends in and they bought the police, and then they're like, oh, well, no,
yeah,
we don't have to pay you because we're more than you. And I was like,
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But like what we're talking about kind of reminds me a lot of, because so now I own my own studio.
Oh yeah, that's right. I
Trying
wanted to
to.
talk about that.
And
Congratulations. Yeah.
it's really,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
hard.
Is it hard? Oh.
It's hard, and it's like, well, it's hard because I'm existing within, this very capitalist like mandate. And when I first started, I did try to start it as a co-op, and literally none of the people that I was working with felt comfortable getting into that environment, because when you look at the Canadian requirements for being a co-op, it's just a corporation with more shareholders. You're
Yeah.
not, it's not a co-op, it's not a real co-op. It's just, you just break it up amongst more shareholders, and they happen
We
to
have
also
that
be
in
the
New Zealand,
workers.
right? There's like a gigantic co-op like Fonterra that runs all the dairy farms and everything in New Zealand, and they have this whole thing like, oh, we're a co-op, we're a co-op. It's like these dudes are like, like they're billionaires, and it's like all the kind of beneficiaries of these giant farming dynasties and stuff. It's like, if you're a co-op, then how come the dudes out milking the cows and stuff aren't getting the same share as that guy? But anyway, that's
Yeah,
just my little minor gripe.
Yeah,
but no, it's
yeah.
like, it's something I look at, and like I can't. Uh, it's like, how do I empower my workers? I am a worker as well, but I also have to like do all this other stuff that's required by the federal government, by my funders, and that's another thing that no one talks about video game studios is, if you look what's been happening with a lot of these studios, why they're shutting down, why they're selling, they've never made a profit. Like, they make money, but that money immediately goes to their investors. They live off investment. So that means they don't actually even own their own means of production. So you have these like CEOs and whatnot. No, they don't own shit. It's all their like, it's all their venture capitalists and all these like millionaires who don't give am I allowed to swear? Like, yeah.
I think I already have a bunch.
Yeah. But they don't give a fuck about games, right? They don't care. And then like, that's what I'm trying to build, is like a studio where the people who make the decisions about the studio care about the product, care about the buyers, care about the people who make the product. Man, I can see why so many studios went sour, because it is hard. It's like you are fighting against a machine, and sometimes it's easier to just give in. Like, if you gotta fight every day, plus make a game, plus take care of your workers, like, I can see why it's so easy. So I'm really lucky in that, like, a lot of my funding comes from the feds. Well, actually, I don't have any funding right now, but like, eventually. But like, the people that are there to support me, they're sort of more like, yeah, you do cool things, and then just pay us back, and we don't really want to have any say in what you're doing. And then in terms of like making the thing, that's a little easier. But oh my god, this, like, we don't talk about class enough in video games. Like, it's a huge issue. It's that a lot of our systems in terms of getting into video games is set up to benefit a very like middle and upper class group of people.
Oh
People
yeah.
who have like, their parents can afford to pay for their education. They can go to their parents' cottage in the summer for 4 months with their friends and have no internet or bills to pay, and just work on a video game for 4 months straight, and then be like, hey, now we've got this game. And then they sell it. And of course they're like, oh, I have all this profit now. And I was like,
Yeah.
well,
Because I had no
like,
overheads. Yeah.
because I had no overhead, because
Mhm.
somebody else covered it for me. Like, their patrons are their parents.
Oh
And
yeah.
so they can afford this. And it was like, this, drives me crazy when they talk and they don't talk about that benefit. And then also what drives me crazy is like there's so many, it's usually guys, but there are some women in the industry who've made it big, who've got a partner who did everything for them. Like if you ever look into the story of what was it, Stardew Valley, and just the amount of labor and time and investment that his wife put into him is insane. Yeah. And I was like, her name should be on that as a producer because that's what she did. But no, they don't talk about it. They don't. They talk. I didn't even hear that. Well, like he talks about it a bit, but he kind of like, I mean, because I guess he takes it for granted. Yeah, it's like, oh, well, of course she's gonna take care of me. She's my wife. I was like, cool. Okay, like, lucky. I would love a partner like that. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I mean, sorry, I just wanted to bring on that specifically what you're talking about. That is like, it's like super important, particularly in the game industry. Obviously, like Megan and I were in the game industry. Well, I think Santo also, and it's like, you know, it's super. It's hard, particularly. Yeah, it's like it's very hard on capitalism. Also, a lot of that work, like this is a thing that like I try to bring up. Like, you know, Holly and I, like Holly is in the chat, but Holly is you know, we're like we're a worker cooperative, and I know a lot of people are calling that, like you're saying, the reality of what you're marketing yourself as can often be different. But that's why I try to, like, you know, we're never going to be there's never going to be a perfect equal partnership. Any democratic workplace or so-called democratic country will never be perfect, but we're just trying to be as best as we can. And so I try to bring up the fact that Holly does a lot of care work that if, you know, I do some care work, but Holly does more, right? We have two kids. The kids are running and screaming and pulling on my leg, right? And I'm over here trying to do my very important man coding work, which is not. I make a point. I say all labor at SourceFood Games, people that even did voice acting or QA, the QA people get the most crap on them. They get $3 an hour, and if you don't like that, well, go to heck, and we'll hire one of the 10 million other people who want to make QA. Everybody who worked on Neofood 1, and I don't want to boast about this too much, but I hope that more studios can adopt this maybe one someday. It doesn't matter if you are the tech lead, the AI, the coding, the writing, the programming, voice acting, or QA. Everybody gets exactly the amount for the hours that you put in. So if you put in 100, if there's 3,000 hours total, if you put in 300 hours, you get exactly 10%. If you put in, you know, 30 hours, you get exactly 1% of everything that comes through. It doesn't, and your labor is not judged because, oh, you were a woman, you were doing caring work, or you were just taking care of these minor things, or you're just a QA person, or you're the big genius with the PhD, and you have the artificial intelligence. You're the producer. You're the executive. There are no executives, and I know that's a hard thing to accept. I just read an article that was like, CEO tried to pay everybody equally somewhere in Britain, and it fell through in like 2 weeks or something. But I would ask why, right? And I think the reason why, if you investigate, is the imperial in the sense of like, I'm going to use the people around me that have less power because of their gender, because of their color, because of their imperial gatekeeping that's called the university system, because of their quote unquote seniority or the prestige of X or Y or Z labor in the society. Oh, you're a peasant, that means you're gonna get nothing. You know, and there's a lot of digital peasants. And so we're defeudalizing gaming. I mean, that's what we try to do. You know, I encourage more game companies to try. I will stop after a little bit, but I want to say, like, we could not run Silver Spoon Games in Honolulu. I could not run Silver Spoon Games in Toronto or in Vancouver or in Los Angeles or in New York City. You know why? Because I would be spending 90% of everything that we make trying to live in a shoebox that is 100 years old, full of bed bugs, that the landlord's charging $3,000 a month, right, for ridiculous prices, right? The cities which are the capitals of capitalism, right? London, New York City, Wall Street, LA, Honolulu, Tokyo, Dubai. You know, these are the places that are great opportunities, but really, in order for us to work, we have to be on a place where police don't evict people, where there is like very affordable housing, and then we can, guess what? We can have the excess, revenue. We're not making tons of money at Silver Spoon Games, or we make like it's like on paper, it's like, it's like less than 20, it's like 30,000. I don't know what it is, but it's not very much. But we can continue to operate and grow because we don't live under the real estate real estate capitalism, medical capitalism, and all these other ridiculous bills that keep you in a feudal servitude. Even if you make $100,000 in Honolulu, you can live in a van easily because it's like $4,000 to have. If you have a family, you could be out on the street, right? Which I was working full time making neofood in a van, eating spoonfuls of peanut butter. We make more money there. Doesn't matter because you are still a peasant in a different way. You're a peasant with mortgage and student debt characteristics, right? That's the point. Anyways, but yeah, anyway. So my main point though is that if you are working in a game company, and this is kind of like game company tips, but also I hope that more people are able to investigate the indigenous future, where people are able to work and produce games and movies and art and all kind of other and rocket ships and interstellar civilizations and eventually and all these great things, because there is not really a way to do this in a capitalist Western imperialist non-indigenous framework. Ultimately, that's what I found. That's why we live where we live. It's close. Big Island is closer to Vietnam than it is to Los Angeles. And anyway, that's my opinion, just based on what I've heard from Luno. Luno is a friend who lives in Vietnam and is a content creator from Vietnam. It's closer in the sense of like the capacity for people to live and the distribution of resources.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And we're not the distance geographically is a little bit further, I think, to Vietnam. But anyways, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Still, there was cultural interchange between the Pacific and Asia and Indonesia back before Europeans came down.
Yeah.
But what was I saying? I was wondering, is anyone we've been talking a lot about I guess like politics and like the past sort of thing, but is anyone working on any projects at the moment that are kind of like, I guess, of an indigenous futurist kind of bend? Is that
that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, Megan, why don't you talk about your project?
Yeah, you've got the detective game, right?
We actually went into full production January 4th, so that's scary. So now I have staff. I'm a boss. I don't know how I feel about that. Because it is like now they look to me to like direct, right? So it's like it's sort of more like being a leader. It's not really like do what I say. It's more like, hey, we're going this way. Everyone come with me. And they're like, yeah. That's usually the response after every big meeting. But it's been great. So we're doing a Hill Agency, subtitle Purity and Decay. And it's just this, we're calling it a cyber noir because it's a indigenous future, but it's a noir indigenous future. And I grew up on detective books and pulp detective fiction magazines and stuff, and I just consumed that like a crazy kid. And I think for me, it's because noir is about traumatized people in a society that re-traumatizes them and uses them up and spits them out. And so I think noir, despite the fact that we don't talk about it that way, is a perfect analogy of the capitalist system that we kind of live in. And it's really interesting that like these detective writers could see it, wrote about it, but at the same time couldn't articulate that was what was happening. Because like it's pretty much the same thing. Like when noir first became popular, you're looking at sort of this weird disconnect post World War II of, do we shame people for not being normal once they get back from murdering other young men and women? Do we shame people who didn't go? And then there was also like weirdness around shaming people who went and didn't kill anyone. So it's like you couldn't win. You couldn't win unless you could pretend like everything was okay. And you could just go have the family and go to work and come back and just live this kind of like life. And what a lot of detective noir was about was like this guy, and either he didn't go to war or he did go to war, but either way, he was broken as a person. And all he was looking for was his fuck you, is what we call it, which is like he's just looking for enough money that he can go somewhere in the country, or he can be rich enough that like nobody can tell him what to do anymore. And I was like, wow, I for some reason really connect with that. And who knows, probably a lot of reasons why, being like indigenous person on my mom's side, dealing with all that crap, and then on my dad's side from Newfoundland. And I don't know if anyone knows the history of Newfoundland, but basically they got also fucked over by the Canadian government. Lent the Canadian government, I think it was like equivalent of $3 million to help them with World War II or one, I can't remember. And then Canada was like, oh, we don't have enough money to pay you back. Why don't you join our country and you'll get all these benefits? And then almost immediately sold all the fishing rights to Japan.
Oh,
and so everybody, because that island was a fishing island, that's how, and they had like very like, you know, it was wealthy in aquatic natural resources, and they didn't use trawlers. They actually, you know, despite them being a settler community, they were actually quite resourceful and very careful to maintain the natural balance. But then once those rights got sold to all these different countries, it just, and so now you have an entirely impoverished province, and you've got you know, an ecological disaster in the making coming. So like that's the kind of the two parts I got. So two very like traumatized groups came together to be my parents and then formed me. And so like for me, I think that's why noir, I was like, this is a place we can talk about these things. And so that's why, so I wanted to kind of play with that. And the idea is it's this future that's like right before the end of the total collapse of like capitalism and colonialism. And I wanted to do it right at that moment, not because like I think there's no value in doing the utopic after. It's because I find that space interesting, and also I find that space the kind of place of like, okay, maybe we can make a roadmap of how to get here. Like that's what I liked about sci-fi. It can become a roadmap of like, well, this is what maybe we should do. And like I love Gibson for that reason. Is like, you know, he's not literally saying you got to do this, but he's sort of like, hey, here's the things that could happen if we stop caring about each other. Or here's the kind of things that could happen when we let a few number of people have too much control. And so, you know, growing up reading that kind of stuff, reading noir, I was like, oh, this is such a great space. And I guess what I also like about futurisms is it makes people feel a little separated from it. Like futurisms are very similar into like sort of historic pieces, in that somebody feels like, oh, I got this bubble of time around me. So I don't have to feel like it's my now. I don't have to feel like you're yelling at me. So they can look at it and be like, oh, yeah, maybe. And I was like,
yeah, like it's familiar, but like, but separate enough.
Yeah.
That's cool. I was actually reminded someone was telling me the other day I need to check out, speaking of mysteries, Moriarty the Patriot. Have you guys heard of that? It's it's a Japanese, it's a manga, and I think there's an anime, and it's
yes.
It's from Moriarty, Sherlock's kind of, you know, historic nemesis sort of thing from his perspective. But apparently it's just like super good, talking about like the class system and, you know, like all these kind of things, and it kind of puts Moriarty's crimes in context of kind of like trying to abolish the class system and everything like that. And yeah, apparently it's really amazing. I really want to check it out. But yeah, apparently it talks a lot about, you know, like, yeah, like the ideas of you know, like this strict stratification between rich and poor, and like Sherlock being very concerned with, you know, like the rich and their, you know, maintaining that kind of hegemony, while Moriarty is kind of attempting to undermine it all, which is I think pretty interesting. But yeah, no, anyway, but yeah, no, that sounds awesome. I'm very keen to check it out. When,
yeah, we definitely want to check out Megan's game. Oh, go ahead, Santo. Yeah.
Oh no, I was gonna say I'm also working on something else. That is kind of like my first long-term project into kind of like Indigenous cyberpunk, because it's kind of like a bit of an ambitious project, but it's basically a game that's split into 3 different stories, and each story like concentrates on a different character and a different interpretation of like what revolution or what post-revolution looks like for this person, this person, this person, and it all takes place in a kind of like semi-fictional South America, and each path focuses on like a different, like it's all based on Guarani culture, but Guarani is like a really broad kind of umbrella term, right? Because there's Guarani like Kiowa, Mbua, Awa Guarani, like there's different groups within that, right? So each path kind of focuses on like one specific, you know, terrain or group. Like one is more in the jungle, one is more in like the wetlands, and one is more in like the desert area. And basically what the game is about is that it takes place kind of like after this big conflict war of like colonization, and the game is about basically how people pick up the pieces afterwards. So part of it is like, and that's like the drawing that I have up of the two mechs. But one is like about indigenous people who pilot mechs. One is about indigenous people that live in this village with like other monsters who like they talk with and live with like amicably. And then another path is more of like inspired by like westerns, where you play like as a sharpshooter who like is really good at shooting guns, which is inspired in part by like some of the sharpshooters during the in Paraguay. There was like a civil war, and there was one woman who was called Soledad Barret, and she was like uh, came from a line of like Spanish anarchists, but she actually became a communist when she was in Paraguay because she came into contact with indigenous people and she saw the way that they lived and said, and the way, but by what I mean with the way they lived is that they lived in extreme poverty. They lived in this like feudal condition. And so she saw that and was like, I have to do something about it. So she joined this like revolutionary communist group that led kind of like a resistance against the government at the time that was basically a dictatorship. And she was known to like, uh, she was very proficient in that, right? And that's kind of like what also inspired that. So the whole game is kind of like an amalgamation of everything I've been learning about like South America, politics and like revolutionary politics, and also just really inspired a lot by like anime, by like things like Gundam, things like Bottoms and all these other anime that like they're very much like about war. They're not necessarily anti-war or anything, but they're like about the consequences of war and like imperialism. And yeah, that's a game that like I'm hopefully releasing next year, but I'm in the process of still acquiring more funding to like have other people help me out. But hopefully I can get it out by next year, because it's something that I've been working on for a while now and something that I've had on my mind to do for even longer. But I'm very excited to like just be able to show everyone what I've been working on.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, that the picture that's in the bottom right, I think that was just showing is that's from the game you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like a almost like a concept piece that I did because like I really like mechs. I've been really getting into mechs lately the last couple of years, and I like the concept of like these huge mechs that are the sizes of mountains and that people would use to like not fight each other but like to engage in combat as like a tournament. And basically in the game itself it's like people had to repurpose those mechs to like fight against colonizers and imperialists. So yeah, there's a lot of like fun world building that I'm playing around with just to like reference the concept of like driving a mech and embodying something else from like a first person perspective.
Yeah, cool. I really liked there's a game. I'm not sure if the second one's out yet. By Heather Flowers, that Extreme Meat Punks Forever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I loved the way that they engaged with kind of mech. I guess the ideas of what a mech is, and that the I was really blown away by that.
Yeah, I'm also inspired a lot by if you listen to it, it's called Friends of the Table. It's like a real play podcast, podcast, and they have done several seasons that take place in like cyberpunk worlds where characters will drive mechs. So, and it's the same kind of idea where they drive these like huge, gigantic mechs and what it means to be like a soldier inside one of those like huge monsters and like embodying something else. And like the famous line that the podcast has is that the weakness of a mech is not the mech, it's the driver who drives it. So operating from that kind of mentality where like the mech is this huge weapon, but the only weakness it has a human driver inside.
Have you checked out BattleTech?
Sorry?
Have you checked out BattleTech?
Not yet. I've been trying to like check out more like because I've been watching already a lot of anime about mechs, but I'm also trying to check out like other mediums.
It's a really great. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go on. whatever.
I was gonna say, yeah. Speaking of like, yeah, BattleTech, the tabletop is really great. But I'm just gonna pop a link in the chat as well to a really good tabletop RPG based around kind of mechs, and but it is very like kind of political, anti-fascist sort of thing. It's called Lancer.
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
think
really good.
Fantasy
Even
Table
the
used that at one point to operate one of their campaigns.
yeah, they're yeah, it's really good, and the whole kind of like the world building and the art and everything is really really awesome. So anyone that is interested in that, I just popped the link in the chat. But yeah, no, it sounds awesome. I'm actually me and my brother have been trying to get our heads around something for a little while. We because I've mainly done videos on YouTube as kind of like you know, video essays and things like that. But because I, you know, like sometimes incorporate a lot of animation, there's always been this kind of thing in my head, like maybe one day I would like work on something like some kind of, I guess, more of a narrative kind of thing, like a kind of I don't know, some kind of serial animation. I don't know what format or whatever, but yeah, me and my brother have been talking about that recently, about what that would look like, or how we could make that work. And there has been a lot of discussion about robots and things like that. So yeah, you might see something from me in a similar form at some point.
Right on. We'll be looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say one thing about like just on the topic of like the indigenous, because we're kind of going to like each of the game. I'll just talk a little bit about Neo 2, just because I figured out how I can enlarge this screen. See, this is Cyberpunk. You know, it's like figuring out amazing ways to utilize OBS. Anyways, what is you know, yeah, hacking OBS. But this is a image from this is something I'm working on for Neo 2. It's just like, it's still kind of a work in progress, but Near 1, like kind of like touching on what Megan kind of brought up, but it's much more noir. It's cyberpunk, which is based on kind of noir filtered through kind of science fiction. So it's mostly cautionary. Neo 2, but Neo 2 does take more, which I'm currently working on. I hope to finish that in the 2021. But it's definitely like there is still like the Imperial, you know, kind of core broken, you know, like it's a lot of it's still gonna have that. But now that I've actually lived in an indigenous future, it's called the Big Island of Hawaii, and also read a lot and I've seen a lot from Vietnam and from Cuba and from other parts of the world that are actually indigenous futures that exist unbeknownst to many people. So like based on a lot of that, I was kind of like constructing like, you know, what would a place like Hawaii? This image, that statue there in the top that's Kamehameha. And then those flags are kind of like a flag that may be a flag of, well, we never do anything illegal, but, you know, there may be the retreat of the illegal occupation of a certain Pacific Island nation that starts with an H and it ends with a Hawaii. Anyways, it's, but anyway, so yeah, so it's kind of like what might things look like based on like, you know, what we have here. And, you know, and so it kind of takes place in, it's actually an interstellar civilization, so it's not literally going to be Hawaii or Earth. It's actually like in an interstellar civilization. But and there's colonialism across the. It's basically like, imagine if you know, Amma, Google, Zon, Disney Plus like colonized not only Mars, right? Like, and we will coup whoever we want, including all the Martian unionizers, when we're breaking rocks there for permanent indentured servitude for Mr. Musk. Imagine if that spread through the entire galaxy. So it's like, it's kind of like, I don't know, the Empire from Star Wars. Anyways, so there's kind of like this interstellar imperial civilization, but then there's also these interstellar indigenous peoples that are also resisting against it, and in a kind of Cold War, or it's kind of like the 2020s, but in space in a certain sense. And while there are very broken, the main character is like a broken Marine who like torched Ewoks, like shot and took all the resources from the you know, the Naboo people, and then went to another, like I've been to 12 different planets and I've killed everyone and took all their oil, the coaxium and all their lithium and all of everything they had. And he's like this kind of broken man. He's like, I just want to die in the Imperial core, and he doesn't believe it's possible to have civilizations that like coexist in peace, that are extremely advanced and actually exploring the galaxy, because it's all been hidden, right, by the Empire. And but then he gets pulled out by like basically the space Vietnamese or the space Cubans, and they go, actually there's this other place that and we need your help because, you know, you actually have a lot of inside info on the Empire. And he's like, no, it's not possible. The only thing that's possible is me living in my car trying to go fund me my insulin. That's the only possible thing. That's the only, and it's like this denial, right, that could even exist is a big theme of it. And then also, but then there's this whole other indigenous people that are, they're aliens, right? And but you know, and he's like, this is, and for a lot of the game, it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out how to do this, where it's like, you know, it's like a Westerner discovering the indigenous people. Actually, and or you know, everything that we've been talking about, right? And like, what is that experience like? Because a lot of people that are going to play this game are going to be, you know, cyberpunk fans. And I've interviewed William Gibson. I might interview him again, but I will say this: like, there is still a kind of matrix of the only solution to a good bad CIA with the gun is a good CIA agent. That's the only thing that can solve it. You know, it's still encapsulated within. We'll just have like the people from Leverage and a bunch of hackers will just hack capitalism. Or hack the bad capitalists in the Pentagon, and it's like, maybe the solution isn't within, you know, the United States. Maybe you have to go outside of that. Maybe you have to like look beyond that. And so it's kind of like, that's my kind of like, I'm reading Agency right now, which is his latest book right now. I'm on the, there's like a,
oh my god, I get it.
Yeah. So I might talk to him about that. I did kind of drop that hint when I was talking to him like in Vancouver. I was like, you know, so have you ever thought about this and that? It was off camera, but I was like, did you know that the reason why Donald Trump won is not just because like the Russians? Did you know that? Did you think about that? And I haven't thought about that much because I spent too much time in the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, well, that's a problem. That could be a problem. Anyways, I should not talk shade. I'm never gonna get another interview with him. But anyways, the Godfather of Cyberpunk.
Right now.
Yeah, but like this sounds a lot like the kind of things that I'm dealing with in mine. Because so I look for, in terms of what I'm doing in mine, I look at our current society as very much a system of trauma response and re-traumatization. And so I look at our world through that lens. That what we're looking at is people in power who've been traumatized by the people in power before them, and the people under them being traumatized by them. And then there's also this denial that we can repair this trauma and that we can undo this trauma. And so, like, you know, the devaluation of mental health, the devaluation of just basically medicine and health, and, you know, the illegalization of medicines that were used by Indigenous people that helped with PTSD, that they're like, oh, no, we don't like our workers getting too healthy because then they get ideas. Because the thing about being traumatized is you enter a binary state of decision making. And, you know, you can't see a future forward. You can only see the undoing of that future. So it's either I am alive or I am dead. I either live in my van or I am dead. And this benefits the people in charge. And I'm looking at it through that kind of lens of actually where you have a sovereign nation on the ground that actually recognizes the damage that PTSD and trauma does, and the fact that it renders people unable to become healthy leaders. And so they work very hard to, if you have trauma, to like put you in a place where you can heal from that, and to put you in situations where you can heal. And that you have then the sort of like Risen City, like space elevator with the flying palaces, where they're like, no, take this drug, take this Prozac, just don't think about it, go home, drink yourself stupid, and then go back to work on Monday. Like that's kind of the environment I grew up in, around, especially a lot of my friends were blue. So like I come from a middle class family, but I lived in this weird space in Hamilton, Ontario, where it was like we'd have very rich families, middle class families, and like blue collar workers in the steel mills living very, very close to each other. And so the schools, the elementary schools, were actually these places where the kids of these different classes would meet and talk. And I would go to my friend's house whose parents worked at the steel mills, and I was just like, how can your dad live like this? Like, you can see the pain in them just for the way that they act and the way they talk to their kids. And you're like, you know, that's not a healthy person. Why are they not? But I, being a weird inquisitive kid, I was like, why are they not healthy? Like, and also like to see the friends that I had whose parents were quite wealthy have like a very similar reaction, where their parents just like would work and not be home, and there would be like nannies in the house to take care of them. But of course, like a lot of these nannies were just like there and then would leave, and the kids would have like, you know, a couple of hours with like no adults around. And then of course, like I would have a similar thing, but not, because the weekends were fine. It's just like I took all of this growing up, and I took it all in, and then I think now I'm getting into a point where I'm reflecting into my work as, holy shit, we're all fucking traumatized, and we're just like trying to work through it, and it's like almost like, oh, everyone's traumatized, like the people in charge are traumatized, the people at the bottom are traumatized, and a lot of us aren't working on it. It's not that we're shifting responsibility. I don't see it that way. I see it as like, it's like you need somebody who's healthy to point the direction, I think sometimes, or even somebody who's maybe not healthy, but at least self-aware enough to say like, whoa, this reaction I'm having is a trauma reaction. I shouldn't be talking to people in my life like this. I shouldn't be treating them like this. And then starting from that point to do that work. And, that's something I see in a lot of Indigenous communities in North America and Canada that we talk about, where it's like, you need to undo what was done to you, so you don't pass that on to the next generation, and then you teach your children, like, okay, if you've got stuff you got to work on, you have to work on that, don't put that on your kids. And so we're kind of like, our process of undoing this harm is, it almost like it starts at home, but then, like you say, like, we've got these systems that oppress and push down and don't like it when you get better. Like, they really don't want you to get better, because people who are healthy mentally and physically can say no, right? And we live in a society of like no consent, or pretend consent is actually what I call it. I did a little stupid meme because I'm going through a shit thing I don't want to talk about, but like, it's like consent, no, only yes. You can't say no. And I was like, well, if I can't say no, it's not fucking consent, is it?
Yeah.
It's just me pretending. It's a play. It's pretend consent.
Well, that's like the whole thing under, like under capitalism or whatever like that. It's like, like you think you have agency, but then when you actually step back, it's like you only have a certain amount of agency within the system, like, yeah, it's, yeah. Like you said, it's like you think you have choices, but when you actually look at it, it's like, well, no, I mean, like, my choices outside of the system are pretty slim.
I mean, just like, think of anybody who's ever worked in like retail or food services. Try saying no to your boss when they step past your boundaries. Of
it's
like,
oh, you can, but then like,
but then there's a million people waiting for your role. I was like,
Yeah, there's always a threat. No, I was like, there's like, I had like three thoughts at the same time, but one of them is that it was the wetsuit. I mean, in so-called Canada, the wetsuit. That was what and I was like following that. I was trying to stream about that like earlier, and we had some trouble with Imperial platforms and getting shadow banned and people getting their Una Stolten account deleted. But anyways, in that time, which is another one. Oh yeah, you're free to say whatever you want as long as you don't actually conflict with fossil fuel pipelines. And the Canadian, I think the government said, oh no, it's prior informed consent from the Indigenous people under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Yes, the Wet'suwet'en have given their consent, and they said no, we haven't. And they said no, you have the right to submit something, but you've consented. Like, no, we don't consent. No, you can say that, but we're gonna put it. No, they're like dancing around this idea of like, no, you live in a consensual world. It's kind, but it's a very like, kind of going from the. That's the difference. To me, that's the difference between the feudal, like, and kind of like bouncing back and calling back to the South American, Catholic feudal oppression and versus the North American capitalist oppression. Feudalism is overt, like, I am the king, and if you don't, I chop your head off. And capitalism is like, oh, you're free to like equally have opportunity to work very hard and acquire a lot of resources, and everybody's equal here. But if you, but actually you're not. But don't ask about it. We didn't put a gun to it, but I mean, maybe I have a gun behind me. That's like the major.
We're the free range chickens that just have the bigger pen.
Yeah, we have a free range with a big pen. Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, yeah.
What Staber, you got anything coming up?
Oh, yes, I do indeed. But
you do.
I'll caveat. Well, I have a few things in the works actually. So in terms of like actual videos and stuff that I'll be making, I will be incorporating like more cyberpunk / sci-fi things as time goes on. Basically, okay, so I'll give a little overview of the direction of my channel. Basically, so like okay. So where do I begin? So much. Okay, so my main passion has always essentially been geared towards like technology, stuff like that. And I've referenced it every now and then in like my content and stuff. But the direction that I was going towards before I started to like read way more and start to talk to people like yourselves and others, it was I would say it was more like geared towards the kind of like Musk stand type things. Like, yeah, we're gonna solve all our problems by like just jacking in a Neuralink into our heads and like going to Mars and all this kind of stuff. I've watched those like almost religiously. I'd seen everything. But it's clear to me now that it definitely needs to be a bit more expansive than that, and we need to definitely challenge the very least the economic things that are economic structure that's causing so much trauma to so many people across the world. So, like the journey that I've taken so far in my videos is essentially trying to map the history in a more like in a way that makes more sense. Essentially what we've been talking about today is trying to just map it out and to be like, okay, so what has actually happened so far before trying to put out content regarding the futures that we can kind of build. Because I feel like if I don't set the foundation properly, then the my views on what the future may look like will be heavily skewed towards things that are just don't really make that much sense. So yeah, right now, in terms of my content right now, I'm basically talking about like the underdevelopment of Africa. I'll be talking about the British Empire and stuff like that, and how the West came to be the way it is, and how certain continents, whether it's Africa, I may even go to like Indigenous in America as well. Just trying to be like, okay, so what, like trying to have a good map first and foremost. And then from there, I will try to like incorporate more cyberpunk, more Afrofuturism going forward. And yeah, and then talking more about like specific technologies as well, whether it's like AI or like blockchain, these kinds of things, like bioengineering, these wacky type things. And so I feel like after that point, this is like a couple years, maybe a year or two down the line. I'm also working like in parallel on some creative writing projects as well. Like I've had a few like budding ideas in my head over the past few years that I'm slowly but surely developing. And so I feel like once I really set a good foundation on everything that I've just said, I can probably sort of dip into more like creative writing, maybe a novel or something like that. Or it could sort of translate into like the backstory of a game, perhaps. Because I program as well. I do some programming on the side, things like that, working on my skills. So who knows what the story will how the story will map out on what medium, but it's kind of like open right now because I'm not necessarily sure 100% on the on like what platform it'll be best represented in, whether it's in the novel, whether it's on the video game, or whether it's something else that I can't even imagine right now. So yeah, that's about it, I think. Yeah, just in general, like I feel like Afrofuturism is one of those things that's definitely under appreciated, especially on like YouTube, things like that. I haven't, because I remember before I made my first Afrofuturist video, I was trying to research myself, and I was like, I can't. There's only like 5 videos. There's like only like 5 or 6. So yeah, definitely trying to do that more justice as well, and trying to see how that fits into this whole narrative as well. Because I'm definitely seeing a lot of parallels between like Afrofuturist stuff and like indigenous cyberpunk and even just old school cyberpunk as well.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really interesting stories that definitely need to be told. Like for example, I recently finished a book called Binti, and that is essentially about this girl who has left her home world and essentially wants to study in this intergalactic university. And what's interesting about these kinds of stories is that like it really does give a far more relatable perspective on an oppressed person as opposed to the usual like tokenization of that we usually see in mainstream media, whether it's like science fiction or any other kind of thing, really. And yeah, it basically goes on her journey as she's trying to basically get towards this university and trying to wade her way through the sort of low-key racism that the other people on board of the ship trying to get there is showing. And it's one of those things that you don't necessarily really see too much in other kinds of stuff. And so there's like many stories that have that kind of relatability to it, and I think it can benefit like so many people, not just Africans, but also other sort of oppressed peoples as well. So yeah, I'll try to do justice in trying to shed some lights on those. But yeah, that's about it for now, I think. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention my next video coming out actually is probably kind of relevant. It's what am I calling it? It's like a part of a series about how to survive in a dystopian cyberpunk street battle, I think it is. I can't remember, but a series of videos about like how to hypothetically survive in a hypothetical like a riot situation or something like that. And the first one is about it's like going over like police and military tactics. Like first one is about kittling, like the kind of process that the police go to shut down riots and all that kind of stuff. And I want to kind of handle a couple other kind of things like that, like why you should protest wearing all black, and like what the advantage of that is, just like these little mini videos that handle that, but from a purely like hypothetical cyberpunk dystopia.
Are you going to do police interrogations? Because that would be amazing.
That was one that I was actually thinking of. Like interrogations, and just like the whole reason why you should like never talk to police without a lawyer.
Never take the chair away in the corner. Always take the chair by the front door.
Yeah.
Shut the hell up.
Yeah, just stuff like that, and purely hypothetical, of course.
Hypothetically, of course.
Encouraging anyone to do anything, but I'm very close to finishing that one now. But that's the first part of that series will be soon. So yeah, that's it for me. I'm just looking at the time, and I think I'm gonna have to jump off.
Oh
but,
yeah.
To go eat.
We're maybe about a little over, but yeah. So if everybody, it's been really good. If everybody wants to, kind of do a wrap up. I mean, I feel like this could go on for 26 hours, but we do gotta move on. I hope to continue these conversations in other settings, in other ways. These are always I always learn something new talking to all of these folks here. But yeah, if you guys want to just go around and any last any last parting words, where we could find you, anything else you want to say?
Tim,
you go first. Or since you gotta go first, so Tim, you go.
Oh yeah.
I go? Okay, cool, sweet. So, my name's Tim. I'm on Twitter as Dread Conquest, or on YouTube as Conquest of Dread. I make a bunch of videos about all kinds of stuff, like the intersection of politics and culture, and like Indigenous stuff, and games and movies and all that kind of stuff. And like tabletop games and stuff. A video that you might like if you like the stream would be my one on decolonizing games, which talks about a lot of it's kind of just like introducing people to the concepts of things like decolonization and indigenization, but through the lens of like how we can apply that to games and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, check that out. There's some links in the chat that that Nightbot has popped down there. It's been great to talk with y'all. I'm gonna have to jump off now, but it's great to be here, great to chat and everything, and I'll see you guys again sometime soon.
Yeah, great to see you. Have a good one, Tim. Aloha.
See you.
Have a good one.
Yeah, it was nice talking to you.
So we're about 2 hours. So if we want to, I probably gotta get going too. What order should we go?
I can plug my stuff. I also need to hop off pretty soon.
Yeah. You're going.
Sorry, can I go?
Yeah. Go. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, but if you want to find any of my stuff, I have a Twitter at Babigoth and also a Patreon under that same name. So I generally use my Patreon to do updates on my current project. It's currently the only like ongoing fund that I have for my project, so it really helps. Any support there helps, and I post regularly about like new concept art, new coding updates to the project, so you can kind of follow along in the development. And then in my Twitter, I mostly just try to plug other stuff about games, and also occasionally tweet about anything that I have coming out. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, I hope to talk again at some point.
Yeah, I hope to do this again. I'd be totally down for it, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Sorry, everybody's like this. Anyways, whoever's ready to go.
Oh, I can go. Yeah. So yeah, again, I'm Megan Byrne. So yeah, Métis of Ontario, which is, that could be a whole podcast onto itself. Indigenous identity and Indigenous spaces is its own thing. But I run Achimos Dawistan Games, which is Achimos Dawistan is a Cree word, which means tell us a story. So we're tell us a story games. Right now, we do have a Twitter at Achimo Games. We do have a website, but it's down right now because I do everything and I'm busy because we're in production. So that's just kind of not there right now, but it will be back soon with like lots of updates and information. But if you want more up-to-date information, you can follow me at Byrne_Megan. So BYRNE_Megan, MEAGAN. And I pretty much tweet at least once a week. But I also in addition to doing all that, I also am like a helper for Indigenous Indigenous game devs. And we have a website, which is just indigenousgamedevs.com. And there's like lots and lots of information, articles. There's articles from Santo in there. I don't think I have any articles, but it's really an amazing resource if you're interested in like Indigenous video games. And also on there, I work on this tiny little database that I'm just like collecting everything I find that's about Indigenous made video games, or like, so that could be like podcasts, or that could be like videos, that could be like academic articles. We actually have a ton of academic articles, and then also like lists of games. So if you're actually interested in playing video games, like, of course, NeoFood is on there. Wouldn't be complete without it. Yeah, so I really recommend checking it out. And thank you for having me. This has been amazing.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming. If you don't have to pop off right now, we can wait till Saber goes.
No,
And then we can.
wait.
Okay.
Because it's so rude.
Yeah. But yeah. Also, I was gonna say, you should definitely watch the Conquest of Dread video because NeoFood also shows up in that. And anyway, yeah. It is. I think like it's yeah. It's like one of the videos. So sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, Saber, you want to go ahead and give your take? I mean your
yeah. Cool. Yeah. First of all, this was fun. I appreciate hanging out with all of you. Yeah. So you can probably find me. I think there's a link in the chat already. Thank you, Holly. I think she put that link there. Yeah. Base as always. Yeah. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's SVBXR. It's an edgy way of spelling my name. People are always so confused by that. I'm just like, at this point, I'm considering either changing it or just to keep it as cryptic as possible. So it's like, if you want to find me, you can find me, that kind of thing. But yeah, in terms of my videos and stuff, I make content geared mainly towards Afrofuturism right now, particularly my last 3 videos. And I think if you were to sort of scroll through my content, you can see a very big shift with the last 3 videos and the videos before that. Because as soon as I got onto Afrofuturism, I was like, all right, this is it. This is it. Okay, this is my thing. So yeah. So in case anyone's interested, just to give a little like 5-second recap on each of my last 3 videos. The first one is just little Afrofuturism 101 type thing. The second one is going over an Afrofuturist novel by Octavia Butler, talking about called Parable of the Sower, which is kind of like a dystopian novel set in the United States. It's set in the year 2000, I believe 2026 onwards, and it was written in 1993, and that's just very, very prophetic in terms of what's actually happening right now. In the sense that like she talks about like wildfires happening and like the breakdown of like the police state, these kinds of things. And I was reading it like whilst there was like wildfires happening last year, and I was just like, oh my god, this is very very telling. And then the last video, the most recent one, is essentially talking about Walter Rodney, who is a Marxist from the Caribbean, and how like Europe underdeveloped Africa, as well as referencing another Afrofuturist novel called The Deep, which is a reimagining of the slave trade and African mermaids, basically, and how they survived underneath the ocean, things like that. So it's a very interesting book. Those are the last 3. The next one should be out in the next week or 2. And yeah, that's about it. Cool.
Awesome. I have to. Holly is currently reading the Octavia Butler. I'm gonna have to get to reading. I have read the Binti. That's what I was saying. I'm almost done with the last of Binti, and then I started reading the Peripheral. I got sidetracked, but the William Gibson books. But we will definitely get through all the Afro futurism. There's a lot of important work there. Anyways, I am obviously Silver Spook guy. I am the Gibson Whisperer. No, it's I do sometimes whisper to him, but he's a cyberpunk adventure game creator. I make at the Silver Spook Games worker-owned cooperative of myself and Holly Argent on the Big Island of Hawaii, and also defender of Mauna Kea, and in the process of decolonization as quickly as can be managed under current circumstances. And obviously, everybody knows where you can find me. I'm not gonna. Oh, Neofeud is on sale right now. So if you know anybody who is like, yeah, I need a $4 for less than the price of a cinnamon chai Baby Yoda latte at Starbucks, you can get your very own indigenous cyberpunk, actually anti-capitalist, will not melt down your Xbox, doesn't have more bugs than the Nightmare Before Christmas Boogeyman. That's what Cyberpunk 2077 has, more bugs. I counted. Anyways, Neofeud is on sale. That's the long story short. Yes. I'm sorry that some people, I wanted to have this conversation like in December. I said to some people, I'm sorry it took so long, but we will try to I'll try to do more of these and arrange more. And if any of you have anything, I'm going to be on a panel sometime in February, I think, talking about games from an Asian and Pacific perspective. But yes, I'm happy to join anyone else who is somebody asked me like earlier in the chat, are you arranging? Yeah, just hit me up on Discord or Twitter at Silver Spook Games or at Silver Spook Guy, which is on the screen right there, or find me somewhere. Anyways, it's been an amazing talk. Always a good time. I feel like I learned more in these talks than like I learned in reading 3 New York Times bestsellers and even going through my entire public education or private education. I went to a private feeder school and I learned more in these conversations. But anyways, thanks so much, you guys, for being around.